Great. If you're just joining, please do say hello to everyone on the chat. Introduce yourself using the chat function, just your name, organisation name, and whereabouts you're based. We're just waiting for a couple more people to come in, and then we'll get going. And if you don't mind muting yourself while you wait, just helps with feedback noise for other people. Great. It's great to see where everyone's joining us from in the chat function. It looks like we've got people from all across the UK. And I know some of our community from our school in India as well, which is fab. Just wait. Give people another minute or two to join. And if you've just joined us, if you don't mind muting your microphone before we begin, and just saying hello to others in the chat function. Great. Okay. Just a couple more people joining. Great. So hi everyone, I am Sophie. I work for the School for Social Entrepreneurs in Communications. And today we're going to be talking about managing your well-being and avoiding burnout, and some ways to recognise if your stress levels are kind of on the increase, and then how to really manage that. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Sorry if I've said this a couple of times, but if you're just joining us, if you can mute your microphone, that would be fab. And please do introduce yourself to others in the chat function and say where you're from and what your organisation is. I'll introduce our speakers shortly, but as we go through the webinar, please do feel free to ask questions in the chat function, and we'll gather those together, and there's going to be time for your questions and answers at the end. We expect the content to last about 45 minutes, and then we're going to have an optional breakout session at the end if you want to share some of your reflections and learnings and experiences with other people, which is really a kind of core part of the School for Social Entrepreneurs approach to learning, is that time to reflect on what you're hearing and share with other people. So we've got a bit of time at the end for you to do that. If you've joined us before for these webinars, we're doing a whole series called Rebuild and Recover, and really they're designed to help social entrepreneurs and people running and starting up social purpose projects to kind of move through the next phase of this crisis and help you kind of get back on your feet. And obviously well-being is a really important part of that. And we are going to be hearing from a couple of really brilliant social entrepreneurs. So Claire Cordell from Littlegate Farm and Sam Francis from Find a Balance. And we're going to be speaking to both those entrepreneurs in what we call a witness style session, which those of you who are SSE fellows or students will know very well. But for those who aren't part of the SSE learning experience yet, that's where social entrepreneurs kind of share their accounts of an experience they've had, you know, the kind of the good, the bad and the ugly, and just share their story in a very open way, with kind of just a few questions from myself or Ian or whoever's running the session. So I hope this gives you a bit of a flavour for the SSE learning style if you haven't learnt with us before. And hopefully you'll learn a little bit about managing wellbeing, particularly in times like this. So now I'm going to pass over to Ian Baker, who is Head of Learning at SSE, specialising in student wellbeing. Ian, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Sophie. And yeah, and nice to see so many people on the webinar. So as Sophie said, I'm the Head of Learning, but really focusing in on student wellbeing, which is an area that we're doing, beginning to do much more around. And as part of that, I'm doing some research, talking to a lot of our students and also fellows, kind of former students, really to find out more about their experiences of managing well-being as social entrepreneurs, which I think is a really interesting area. And that's not just about what's happening with COVID, obviously it includes that, but it's also the broader experience of well-being and being a social entrepreneur. And one of the people I've spoken to so far is Claire Cordell, as Sophie said, from Littlegate Farm. So, and Claire started her social enterprise back in 2013, and she's been on SSE's startup program, and then subsequently on Scale Up and on a community business program. And I know from talking to her that she's got a really valuable story with lessons learned around her managing her own well-being. So Claire, welcome. Are you there, Claire?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Ian. Hello.
Welcome, and lovely to have you here. And thank you for being willing to share your story. So I'm just going to start by asking you just to give us the sort of, in a nutshell, a bit about yourself, your organisation, what you do, who you serve, and how do you do it in a brief nutshell. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So I set up a CIO that supports adults with learning disabilities and autism, based on a farm in East Sussex. The farm is a training centre, and we prepare people for employment. And then we have another arm that supports them into work through supported employment. So it's a organisation that grew from nothing. There was very little in East Sussex for adults with learning disabilities or autism to go into work, and it was driven from a very heart-centred place from me, very passionately wanting to change that. So it's to really create change across East Sussex. And we grew very quickly over that time. So in that time, if we weren't for COVID, we'd have hit £1 million income this year with over 60 staff. So we've grown rapidly in that time.
Great. It's really impressive growth over that period of time, which I'm sure is going to link into your story of how you manage all of that. So just picking up a little bit more then and relating this to your own well-being. Tell me about a kind of time on that journey of growing your social enterprise when it kind of felt the hardest and probably when you hit more of a crisis point. What was the context? What was going on in the run up to that period? Just give us a flavour of that.
So I think I've been very lucky in my life. I've never had any mental health issues, and I had moments of stress in my life, but I'd never kind of felt out of control with stress. I have 3 children, and the youngest has a severe learning disability, and she can be quite a handful, but I think I'm quite a resilient character, and I've been able to kind of manage the stress of having her, and actually it really inspired me to set up Littlegate. So seeing that, becoming part of that community really inspired me. So the startup phase was very exciting, and I think one of my strengths is that I'm able to galvanize people to kind of come on board. There's that video, One Lone Nut, and you kind of get everyone to come with you and come on that journey. And I really felt that was, it was a very community-led project with a lot, and we had a lot of people behind me and wanting us to succeed, and we got grant funding, and we were growing. And I think that startup phase I'm particularly good at, because it's a time of creativity and juggling balls and kind of making mistakes, but kind of, you know, turning the boat quickly, pivoting quickly. So in 2016, which is, I was 3 years in, and the organisation had doubled every year in incomes, in staffing, in size. And I started to notice that my wheels were starting to come off a little bit, but I didn't recognise what it was at first. So my sleep started to go. I started to experience more staffing issues, because as we were growing, I was making mistakes with HR, making recruitment errors, and then having to kind of deal with those. And you kind of don't want to be that person that fires people and lets people go, but you know, you have to if you want your organisation to succeed, and kind of serve the people that you want to serve. So I started to notice that firstly my sleep was going, and that my kind of rational decision making wasn't as acute as it had been before. I started to kind of not be sure that I could trust my own judgment around things. At the same time, I had personal issues happening. So my daughter with learning disability, her behaviour was particularly challenging. My mum had a heart attack, and she was one of my main childcare. My son transitioned, and so all of that happened at the same time. So as the organisation was continuing to grow, so with not being able to deal with those personal things that were going on in my life, because the organisation was so all-consuming to me, and it felt like my spiritual gift to the world, like I was put on this earth to kind of serve and do this thing, to then suddenly find that actually not only did I not have the tools to do it, I was my resilience was slipping, and I just overrode it. So instead of thinking, hang on a minute, something's not quite right, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
You can't be in a position of leadership and to be shown you're struggling. Well, that's what I thought in 2016. I thought there's no way that the team need me to fall apart. They've got to see me kind of, you know, and I suppose there was an element of perfectionism going on in that as well. I thought that I had to be everything to everybody. And of course, within this community, the type of organisations we run, we often work with people who are quite vulnerable, and a lot of the staff were quite vulnerable with their own mental health issues as well. And you know, you kind of find yourself in this sort of mama bear role of kind of trying to save everybody, trying to make sure the organisation is serving everybody. So you stop taking care of yourself completely. So I stopped entirely taking care of myself.
And how did you get through that then?
So it got uglier. So that August to that December, I'd started on Scale Up, and I found Scale Up quite intimidating when I first started it, because all these amazing social entrepreneurs who've done all these amazing things. Some of them had TED Talks, you know, really doing amazing work, and of course it's very inspiring, but it's also quite intimidating. So the wheels really came off at Christmas, just before Christmas, and I found that I couldn't stop crying, and that I was just this really unusual situation where everything was very upsetting. I wasn't sleeping. I was getting very angry with the kids and at home, and then I had this bizarre incident where a sheep died, and it sounds kind of crazy because sheep do die. That's what sheep do. They're very good at it. But I felt so immensely responsible for this sheep dying on top of everything else, all the staffing problems, my family, that I just went down. And I knew that Christmas I was going to have to do something, otherwise I was going to go into mental health issues. So I spoke to my chair and I said, I'm really not coping. I feel very burnt out. And I'd read a couple of articles online, and I'd realised, that's what this is. And I I'd no kind of words for it up until that point. And I recognised then that actually what was happening to me was quite common, actually, in leadership anyway, but particularly for us social entrepreneurs, because we're so driven by something that's far greater than ourselves.
Yeah.
And you want to, you know, you don't put yourself first. So you kind of, you know, you're just giving everything to these organisations. And, you know, and that works really well at the beginning, because that's kind of what you need to get up and going. So at that point, I took 3 weeks off, which wasn't a lot, but it was actually what I needed at that point. So that over that Christmas period, you know, God, my husband didn't know what to do with me. I was just crying all the time. And actually that kind of letting out all of that grief and stress was very cathartic. And I made some decisions about, you know, really honestly looking at why I wasn't coping. And, you know, I really took the time to look at what I wasn't doing very well, you know, and what I needed to help me. So there was a member of my team who...
Yeah. All right, how are you? You good?
There was a member of my team who was fantastic and a great wingman, but I promoted her at that point to manager, and that just changed everything. So I was able to start having very honest conversations with her about my strengths and my weaknesses, or the things that I needed support around, and I started to take much more notice of when my stressful moments were happening. So I started journaling at that point. I'm a terrible meditator to this day, but I make sure I have 5 minutes every day at least to do that, to ground myself, because I'm a little bit ADHD naturally. I'm a little bit all over the place, and I need to ground myself and kind of be quite present. So, and actually I've also started to be really honest about what I'm not very good at, you know, and what I find tiring. And, you know, and then at that point I started to really build the organisation and the people to their strengths to match mine.
Yeah.
And you know, it was a really fundamental moment for me, and it was frightening enough, I think, but I caught it early enough to really make some fundamental changes.
And is there anything else that you do now in response to stress that you weren't doing then? So journaling, some bad meditation.
Yeah, I do really bad dancing in my kitchen as well. I dance. I think that the other thing is about your body tells you everything you need to know, everything you need to know. And I hold stress right in the center of my chest and really badly in my shoulders. So I'm really aware of that. And I can't do yoga every day. You know, that's just not possible. But I can do certain things that allow me to kind of release it physically. And even if it's bad dancing in the kitchen that frightens my children, that's fine. You know, I've got to kind of honour how I'm feeling and try and kind of work it out, because my body will tell me first, and then I won't sleep. So if I listen to my body first, I'm much more likely to be able to sort it out.
Great. And we've got about a minute left. Just tell me what kind of advice would you give to other social entrepreneurs who might be feeling stress at the moment? It might be kind of some of the things you've just said. I mean, what would be the kind of standout thing for you?
Yeah, I think what I wish I'd known then is I wish I'd known that actually this is a normal part of the process, and at some point, if you think of it as a sliding scale, you are going to go along it. Hopefully not all the way, but you will move along it. So, you know, your first responsibility is to yourself and to your own well-being. And I know it's that whole cliche about the oxygen in the mask, and I knew that, but it didn't mean anything to me at the time. But now I know I can't perform well if I'm not taking care of myself. So I've really done a lot of work around my own self-value, which wasn't there when I started the organisation, and about, you know, actually I am imperfect, properly imperfect. There's a lot of things wrong with me that don't make me a great leader, but that vulnerability actually has made me far better than I was before. So I think, you know, saying actually no, I can't do that right now, you know, setting those boundaries, being much clearer with everybody in my life has really helped.
Great. We're afraid we're going to need to leave it there, but we'll have plenty of time for questions for you, Claire, at the end. So, but thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's a lot of themes in there that I'll pick up on a little bit later as well. So thanks, Claire. So just hand back over to Sophie for the next part.
Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing. And as Ian mentioned, we will have time at the end for your questions. So please do feel free to share questions in the chat. I am really pleased to introduce Sam Francis. Sam is the founder of Find a Balance, which supports the mental health needs of people and families, particularly those from minoritised and social disadvantaged backgrounds. She also works with Haringey Council and with the Mayor of London and Nike in a role for Loris's Model City. And she's also a single mum of 5. So as you can imagine, she's got a fair amount on her plate, and has kind of been through the same journey of learning how to manage her well-being. Sam, just to kick us off, it'd be great if you could explain a little bit more about Find a Balance and your journey as a social entrepreneur.
Hi everyone, nice to meet everyone. And for you, Claire, I can really relate to where you're coming from. So Find a Balance is a mental health organisation and support people from the BAME communities, predominantly the individuals and their families, but we go into individuals' homes and offer our services. And we work with the individual and their carers or families at the same time to support them with their well-being. And we do that by providing talking therapy, physical exercise sessions, mentoring, and support. So we look at the whole picture of what's going on within the family to support them. And how a bit about me is, I'm a single, proud mum of 5 children. And 6 years ago, my son had a psychotic breakdown. He was at university and he broke up with his first girlfriend. And anyway, he ended up getting sectioned. And through what he went through going through the system, through the hospital and escaping from hospital and everything, I did some research on mental health around the BAME communities and why are we at the more predominantly severe end of mental health before any interaction or support is in place. And I realised it's because of the stigma around mental health within those communities, and that it's never discussed really, although mental illnesses affects everybody, and your own mental health and well-being affects everybody at some point in their life. In those communities, it's not talked about, it's believed to be witchcraft, etc. So I launched Find a Balance, and I'm coming from like a government background. I started as an admin assistant, worked my way up to management level. So I was always an employee, I've never run a business. But I was so excited about starting my own business and going on this journey. So I just went right in. I was just so enthusiastic about it. Find a Balance became my everything. And at the time, my children, my eldest was 25, which is a daughter. I had my twin boys that were 22. And then I had my 14-year-old and my 11-year-old. And so I was running my home and still trying to set up this business. And I was like a networking guru. I went to every type of networking event to meet people. I was at SSE at the time, and it was just full on, and I was still caring for my son, so I was going to all his appointments. I was liaising with the GP, the psychologist. I was trying to get him extra support, plus I was helping my children with their education, and I was just like mother duties, the business, and I became sort of like non-existent, as in I wasn't caring for myself. And what happened was I became under immense pressure. The first thing that happened was I just couldn't sleep well. I got so burnt out that I just couldn't sleep well. And then my appetite changed. I was just grabbing fast food because I was always on the go. I'd be out the house at like 8, 9 a.m. and coming in at like 10, 11 at night. So it really affected me. And then one day I just thought, oh my God, how can I actually be up for the whole night and I've got to be at the House of Commons, like 11 o'clock in the morning. I had no sleep. I looked at state and I just broke down crying. And I thought, what is wrong with me? Why can't you organise your time? You've always been so amazing at organising. And I realised I was so stressed and burnt out, but all the advice I was giving to other people, I wasn't taking for myself because I just absorbed the business. I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And I just completely forgot about myself. And I had to sort of like sit down and look at myself from the outside and reflect on how I've been going over the past, say, year and odd. And I just thought, if I continue, I'm going to be not burnt out, I'm going to be flat out, and then there'll be no find a balance. So all the work I've put in that year, learning, creating, and supporting everyone would just be a waste and it would go nowhere. And the first thing I did was I took a whole week out. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it was very good for me at that time. And in that week, I just self-isolated. I didn't communicate with no one. I just put out messages to say that I'm on a week's break. I took the time out for myself and I started to look at what I've been doing over that year and where did I go wrong. And then I looked for my triggers. When did it actually start that I was burning out? Because one of the most important things is knowing your triggers so that you can prevent those triggers from happening. Or if a trigger does arise, you can see it and deal with it there and then. Through doing that, I learned about meditation. Meditation's gospel for me now. I do 20 minutes every night and 20 minutes every morning before I do anything. It's just time for me for unwinding, because in the job that I do, I hear so much trauma. I hear really horrific stories of what people have been through. And I was taking it away with me and absorbing it all and not releasing it. So I learned to release it when I came home. Then I'd sorted out my timeline, as in, these are the days that I'm going to be available. These are the times that I'm not available. Because my phone would be on 24 hours and I'd get a call like 2, 3 in the morning saying this has happened or that has happened. So I learned about time management, which was so important for me, having time for myself, because I didn't even used to have weekends. I'll be doing like workshop at the weekends and things like that because people weren't available in the week. So I thought, oh no, let me do it for them. But what I didn't realize is you have to have time for yourself, and you're a mum. You was a mum before you created and launched Find a Balance. And so I started to have a time where this is where I'm available. And I was able to say to people, I'm sorry, I can't attend that, but I'm available at this time. Before, I wouldn't do it. I would make sure I go even if I'm late. I was just pushing myself way too much. And that's how I became so burnt out.
And so how did that feel to like put those boundaries in place a little bit and start saying I'm only available in these times? Because that's it sounds like absolutely essential, and how did it feel to kind of make that shift, and how did people respond?
It was really scary telling people, no, I'm not actually available, because I spent the whole time saying yes, 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 yes. And to say no, it was like, but I could say it constructively that I can't attend then, but I can attend at these times. So at first it was really hard for me to do, but I knew that I had to do that for my own self-care and my own well-being, because I realized that if I'm not okay, my kids are not okay, the business isn't okay. And that is really, really, really important. And so I changed my time management. So at 6 o'clock of the evening, I'm switching off. It doesn't matter what's going on, I'm switching off. If I know that I'd have to attend, say, an event in an evening and on, say, a Wednesday, then a Tuesday, I would finish early to make up that backfall, because I know on a Wednesday, I'm going to be coming in late. Time management, having more, I could say, love for myself, and not just seeing myself as just Sam, just taking that self-love and self-care for myself. It was so important. I changed my eating habits, started drinking a lot more water. I just had to really, really think of myself in order to move forward and do better.
And it's interesting because a lot of the things that you're saying you put in place now to manage that well-being are almost like the flip side of the things that you can now see were triggers. So, you know, now like the healthy eating, the having time boundaries, the, you know, like meditating is almost when you were saying, actually now you can see that the moving to junk food and feeling that you had to work every hour of the day was almost like the opposite as the trigger. So what would you say to other people listening who maybe are like, oh, it sounds great taking time out, but I just don't have time to kind of do this bit of reflection? Like what advice have you got for like what signs they should put out and what they could put in place, you know, quite quickly?
I would say never think you haven't got time for yourself, because yourself is more important than anything you can think of, you know. Just take that time, sit down and work out how you can make that time, because it's so important, and later on it will catch up on you. And know your triggers, know when you're not feeling right, you know, and be able to sit down and reflect and have a look at, why ain't I feeling right? When did I start not feeling right? You know, and have a look at that, because it's so important. And being a social entrepreneur is such a lonely road, because you can go to someone and say, oh, you know, I'm feeling stressed out. Well, life is stressful. They don't get it, you know, so you feel alone. So take that time out for yourself. No matter what you're doing, take that time out, because in the long run, you will feel it, you know, it will catch up on you, it will. And just meditation's really good. Like, I never meditated before. And at first it was really, really hard, because my mind would be going all over the place. Oh, I've got to do this. But I'd bring myself back to breathing. So it's about disciplining yourself when you're meditating as well, because it's not just you do the meditation and it works. It took me about a month to ground it, you know. So meditation is really good, and healthy eating. And even if you just take time out of the day and have a walk, you know, even if it's just a 5 or 10 minute, that little fresh air, that time away from the computer, that time away from phone calls is so good for you, and it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got people in the chat function like just totally hearing what you're saying there as well. Like people feeling that when you're a social entrepreneur, you kind of put yourself at the bottom of the pile and you feel that you've got to give. And
You do.
And how important it is to learn how to say no as well. But it feels really difficult because you're so committed.
It's you know what, it's very difficult because your organisation becomes your baby. You eat and breathe it. So that's how you lose yourself. But what you've got to always remember is that if you lose yourself, then that organisation is not going to exist. So put yourself first, and then everything else comes after. Definitely, I would say that, you know, definitely, just because sometimes you just forget about yourself, you know, and you become your organisation.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, thanks so much for sharing your story, but also so much advice for other people. I can see people in the chat saying,
you're welcome.
And yeah, hearing what you're saying, thank you. And just to remind everyone, if you've got questions for Sam or Claire, just pop them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end. Thanks, Sam. I'm going to pass back to Ian now. He's going to share some reflections and learning. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, really, really interesting to hear both of you, and so many things with what I'm hearing from other people who've spoken to as part of this research. So, and maybe just to reflect back, a few of the things I heard from there actually were around, you know, the kind of the role of passion for social entrepreneurs, and I'm going to pick up on that in a minute. Often there's multiple responsibilities involved, which can really lead to more stressful situations. Knowing your triggers, that was a great point. The importance around valuing self. I love Claire's analogy of putting your own mask on first, you know, like in the airline. So I think that's just a really nice way of holding on to that if you don't do that, then you can't help others. And time for yourself. And yeah, can I think focusing on your strengths as well, which is something else I'm going to pick up on. So just let me just share a few of the headlines then. So some of these are things you've touched on, so I'll skip over them. But if we can see the slide here. So these are just 5 themes that have come out from the people I've spoken to so far. So I've spoken to probably about 20 people so far. I've got a few more to do. So I probably would have been good to reveal these one at a time, but you can see them all here. So I'll go through them just quickly. So we've got time for questions. But I'll just say a little bit about some of these. Managing the double edge of your mission. So that links into the passion that you've both just spoken about, really. So because obviously you're social entrepreneurs, you're driven by often personal experience, and you're really passionate to address the issue. But it also means that you're probably likely to go way beyond your limits in trying to address those issues. And also because there's often no limit to the need out there. So when do you stop? And I think in talking to some people, I think it's okay to think about what your end game is, and when what are you trying to personally achieve with this, and when's the right time for you to stop, and when do you need other people around you who are maybe better placed to take it on. So I think it's about not being shy about having that conversation with others and with yourself, even at the very beginning, so you don't feel this huge pressure of having to always carry on. And then secondly, so aligning your strengths and passions to avoid imposter syndrome. So I'm sure a lot of you may be familiar with imposter syndrome. And I think in speaking to people, what's quite interesting is, and I think Sam, you touched on it, is that often social entrepreneurs have got an experience and passion about the issue they're trying to address, but they don't have experience and skills and passion about running a business. But that's what they end up doing. Effectively, they end up running an organization. And because they haven't got the experience or skills, it can mean that they're not really feeling that they're very good at it. I mean, obviously, that's a big part that SSE plays in helping build and develop those in people. But I think it can really bring you up against that imposter syndrome, thinking that you're trying to do all these things to run the organization, and yet you're not really feeling very good at it. So I think it's really important as you grow is to really try and align more with your strengths and get people around you as much as possible who are good at the things that you're not so good at, and get them doing the things they love, because people have been telling us that really reduces the stress. If you feel that you're doing something that you're really good at and you're passionate about, you're not having to try and do things that actually you might be bored by or you find stressful. So I think that was a really interesting headline. Number 3, embed wellbeing into the organization's core. So this has come through in with Sam and Claire, but it's not just wellbeing isn't just something we provide for the people that we serve. It should be a core principle of how we run our organization. And it's interesting how often it isn't, because of that passion and that working so much to try and meet the mission. So aligning with people's strengths is one way of doing that, but also as the founder and as the CEO, how are you making sure that you're prioritizing your own well-being in the same way you might do prioritize your strategy or your finance or your reporting to your board? Is it on your to-do list or your to-be list? Are you making sure you're booking in your holidays? Have you got sources of support around you? So maybe think about what you're doing in that area for yourself and making sure it's on your list so it doesn't get ignored. And also just to touch on the sort of, in terms of embedding it into the organization, there's something there about the business model and your structure as well. And there's so many people I've spoken to, particularly in the early stages, where actually you're having to do other work because you're not paying yourself through the social enterprise yet. So I think the earlier you can really build that in, the less stress it's going to be, because you can focus on one job rather than two. And I know it's easy to say that, it's very hard to do, but people end up doing that for years. And I think there's something to look at the business model to see, are there ways of getting around that. For reframe setbacks as learning. So obviously social entrepreneurs take risks. It's something that's just inevitable, and it's part of what you do. So you're going to have setbacks, and you're probably going to have quite a lot of them. But as much as possible to see these as kind of opportunities to learn and build resilience. So some of the people I've spoken to have said, well, actually having the experience, knowing that you can get through things, even if it's challenging and it's felt like a failure, means that the next time you face something difficult, you've got that little bit more resilience in you, and self-belief, knowing that you can get through this as well. So, and also maybe being a bit more open with the challenges you face with the people around you, because I think then that can give them permission, particularly if you've got a team. And then finally, which we've covered, which has been touched on, and I think is really important and often gets lost, is building in the recovery time. So, peaks and challenges and peak periods are to be expected, but those are usually the times when actually, it seems paradoxical, but that's the time when you need more than ever to build in that time for yourself. And so how can you ring fence that? Is it at the beginning of the day before you get started, to do whatever works for you, whether it's meditation or going for a walk or walking the dog, or that's individual to each person, but just building in that time to step back from the challenges you're going through, or build it in at the end, so you've got a recovery period, like a week off, or the 2 weeks off or whatever, so you've got that to recover. But recovery just gets lost. It's the first thing to go under stress. So yeah, that's the headlines for now, and once we've done some more interviews, we'll share kind of the research more fully, to hopefully be useful to everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian. And yeah, really interesting research and reflections on the learning so far. So we've got a few minutes now for questions for our speakers. Already some shared in the chat, which I'll share back now. And if you've got a question for any of our speakers, do feel free to just pop it in the chat as we talk for the last few minutes before we go into our optional breakout rooms. Got a question for Claire that I think probably would also apply to Sam. Like, how did you recognise when you were coming out of that burnout period?
I recognised it because I think it was about 2 months after I promoted my manager, and she really became my wingman. Like, she was such a great support to me, both doing practical things and doing the things I wasn't very good at and didn't really enjoy doing, but also she was the person that I could really lean on when I was feeling kind of just struggling a bit, because we all have bad days. And I can remember driving home one day and feeling joy again, just feeling like, oh, that was a good day, and thinking, I'm coming back, I'm coming back to feeling more like myself, and my sleep got better, and I just, you can kind of see the flowers again. It was that kind of moment for me.
Thank you.
For me, do you want me to come in, Sophie?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
For me, it was when I remember waking up one morning. I jumped out of my sleep and it was daylight, and I thought, oh my God, I've slept the whole night. And I felt so good. And that day, but I had 2 volunteers in place at that time supporting me. So it was like, I went out that day, went for my meetings, went back to the office, and I just felt this sense of happiness, like, now things are under control. Now things are, because sleep was a big part of my burnout. I just couldn't get to grips with sleep because I was so stressed. And I just felt so good that day, and I felt so happy. And then from then I was able to understand that you're in a good place right now. Now you need to stick to this and just, start saying no. And that's how I started to say no to things and manage my time more effectively. You feel it inside, you feel that, as Claire said, you feel that happiness and you feel better.
And I guess that's probably another thing for people to look out for, if they don't know whether or not they're kind of nearing a point of crisis or burnout, is to kind of look out for that lack of sleep, lack of joy, lack of, your kind of normal sense of self. And another question, who or what support could have helped you when you were really struggling?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was as honest with my chair of trustees as I should have been, because I wanted him to think that I was managing. And actually, had I leaned in a bit harder to him beforehand, I think I probably wouldn't have reached that crisis point. Also, you know, I suppose I just felt that I had to do everything. I was still, and I think women are particularly at risk of this. You know, you still feel that you have to be super mum. You know, you still feel that you have to do all the cooking and the cleaning in the house and run an organisation and be there for everybody. You know, and it's going back to what Sam was saying about being a bit more boundaried and saying no to things, and actually saying, hang on a minute, this could be all be shared out much better. So that for me was reclaiming my boundaries and my own personal worth, but actually and leaning in on the people that could be supportive.
I totally agree with Claire 100% that I think one of the things I say to everyone, it is good to talk. Where I felt so lonely, I didn't think people would understand and relate. And I was always, before I was doing this, I was always the one that everyone leaned to. I was the oldest of 8 children. So I had 7 brothers and sisters. So everybody leaned on me, friends, everything. So I didn't feel confident to reach out and say, look, I'm actually not coping. This is sort of like killing me. I wish that I reached out and just said something to someone of how I was really feeling and not just push myself to keep going, you know, because it was just no good. It would have helped to speak to someone, and it would have helped if I recognised my signs earlier, definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Claire and Sam and Ian, for sharing. I'm afraid we've run out of time for questions, but just thanks so much. I feel like all of you have offered so much advice, like practical advice, as well as your own stories, which I'm sure lots of people will feel reassuring if they're feeling, you know, anything like those kind of experiences. I'm just going to run through some further opportunities for learning with us, and then we'll have an optional breakout session. So at the School for Social Entrepreneurs, we always like to give people a bit of time and space to just reflect and share experiences with their peers. So if you do want to stay on for that, that will run just to 2 o'clock, and that won't be recorded. You'll just have a chance to kind of be in a smaller group with other people on the webinar, and just reflect on a bit of what you've learned, and kind of share any other experiences or tips that you might have. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is part of a whole series called Recover and Rebuild. We'll send you a link to it in the follow-up email, because we've got some more coming up on contents like content marketing and social media marketing, and there's some great recordings, ones we've already done on managing cash flow in the crisis, and crowdfunding, and lots of great topics as well. And also in the follow-up email, if you're based in the UK, each of the schools in the UK regions have got kind of online meetups as well. So again, that's another forum for you to just meet with other people in the social enterprise community and just reflect on where you're at and share experiences and share resources. And then in the UK, India and Canada, our websites are there as well. And obviously we do a whole range of courses and programs and support programs, and often grant funding as well. So yeah, we're here. We're here for all of you. So if you don't know SSE yet, you know, we're here for you guys. So please do connect.